Mr. Speaker, this government has in fact made commitments to the treatment of children with autism, and we have increased funding for that. The most recent report and recommendations that have come forward have a very significant price tag associated with them, and that, Mr. Speaker, is a significant challenge in meeting the health care needs of this province when we would add a very significant figure to that already challenged number.
Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, I remind the Minister for these families and these children, there is no price tag you can put on their future, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, experts have looked at this problem and they have determined that these children need intense therapies. These therapies are being provided in other provinces in this country, yet in our province, children with autism go without. So I want to ask the Minister, when the consultants were asked to look at the programs and what could be provided, were they given a limited amount of money to work with, and would he commit to tabling here today the terms of reference that were given to the authors of the report that's listed on the Department of Health website?
Here.
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I would certainly be prepared to look at that situation and see if there's indeed any reason why I should not provide that information. And I will be quite happy to do that. Thank you.
The honourable member for Richmond.
Mr. Speaker, 5 years ago, this government was first elected under promise to fix health care. The Premier made it his greatest priority, and today it has become his greatest failure. For Richmond County, their promise to fix health care has meant continual shortage of doctors, regular closure of the emergency room services at Straight Richmond Hospital, and still today, no new Richmond Villa. This past weekend, added to the list was the sudden closure of the detox unit at the Straight Richmond Hospital. We have been told that this was a one-time occurrence and that it will never happen again. And my question to the Minister of Health is, what assurances will the Minister make that when people in the Straight area and outlying areas need addiction services, it will be available to them 7 days a week?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the honourable member that every effort will be made to ensure that the services to which he refers are provided on a continuous basis. And but I would also, Mr. Speaker, indicate to you and to the honourable member in the House that I did not make any such undertaking that there would never again be any interruption of service. I can't make such guarantees. What I can tell the honourable member through you, sir, is that every effort is being made and will always be made to ensure that there is continuous coverage.
The honourable member for Richmond on your first supplementary.
One can only hope the detox unit fares better than the emergency room at the Straight Richmond. But, Mr. Speaker, another area where this government has created more chaos than solutions is when it's come to dealing with seniors in this province. It is the government's role to ensure that the programs are in place for seniors when and where they need them. Mr. Speaker, it was this government, however, that chose to freeze the in-home support program in 2000. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal caucus has been advocating that seniors have the supports and care they need in their own homes for as long as possible. A nursing home should be a last resort, not a place to go because government has abdicated its responsibility to provide as many services as possible to allow seniors to remain in their own homes. My question to the Minister is, does the Minister recognize what hardships he and his government has caused to seniors when his government chose to freeze the in-home support program in 2000?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
It's very interesting, Mr. Speaker, to listen to members opposite, especially from that quarter, plead for additional funds for services that are required and indeed services that all members of the House would like to see expanded and provided. And they, Mr. Speaker, are the same people who are apologists for the fact that the Government of Canada will not live up to the Romano commitment of 25% of health care costs. That, Mr. Speaker, is what's coming from that side of the House.
The member for Richmond on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, it's about priorities. It's about the priorities of a government and whether they are going to make seniors their priority. When the Liberal government was in power in this province, we made seniors a priority. We provided the money for the in-home support program. We did not blame Ottawa. We did not use Ottawa as an excuse to abandon seniors in this province. We allowed seniors to stay in their homes for as long as they possibly could before they would have to go to a nursing home. This minister and the previous ministers have abandoned seniors who want to stay in their own homes without having to go to a nursing home. The Liberal caucus has continued to advocate for a return of these programs, which has fallen on deaf ears for this government, and yet they cannot understand why healthcare costs are out of control and why more and more seniors need to turn to nursing homes. So I ask the minister again, does this government intend to reinstate the in-home support program or any other program like it that will allow Nova Scotia seniors the dignity of remaining in their own homes for as long as they possibly can?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member speaks about support for seniors. Mr. Speaker, we are the people who provided the tax relief for seniors so that they could, in fact, remain in their own homes. That came from this, Mr. Speaker, and we continue to provide grants for seniors to remain in their own homes, to improve their homes. There is, of course, the continuous programs provided through the various departments of this government to assist seniors to remain in their homes. You know, the honourable member makes reference to these programs as if they are all abandoned, Mr. Speaker. They are the ones that abandoned many of these programs, and we're restoring them.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Community Services. The Ham government has committed just under $2 million of its $18.6 million under its federal provincial affordable housing agreement, Mr. Speaker. A few weeks ago, an announcement was made of 200 more units, but on a closer inspection, the minister was only putting out requests for proposals for new projects. He admits those projects might result in 200 units or less, depending on what community groups propose. My question for the Minister of Community Services is simple, Mr. Speaker. When will you finally live up to the commitment you made in 2002 and build much-needed affordable housing for the residents of Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and indeed it is a good time to be in Nova Scotia when it comes to affordable housing, because things are beginning to happen. It was good to be able to get up there and make that announcement. Very pleased that Minister Regan was able to join me on that day, and we look forward to responses and many more announcements to come soon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
I find it hard to believe this department needed 2 years to figure out the housing needs of Nova Scotians. Other provinces know their housing needs. The waiting lists speak for themselves, Mr. Speaker. Thousands of people are waiting for affordable housing, and thousands more are at the risk of losing their homes and paying too much for their housing costs. I ask the minister, when will these families be able to move into new housing created under this program?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to answer the member's question, the first 15 units are all rented out in Middleton. That is a start, but we look forward to many more being able to acquire affordable housing under the program. It's good that the federal government has recognized their responsibility for social housing and come back into this. Their withdrawal in 1993 has cost the province of Nova Scotia alone over $1 billion over the full term of the agreement. And we welcome them back. We think this is a good thing to happen, and it's about time, and we're pleased to be working with them and our other partners to make more affordable housing for low-income Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, that's 15 units in almost 2 years. When the Affordable Housing Agreement was announced almost 2 years ago, it was estimated that it would address nearly 1,500 units within the 5-year program. The minister said at a press conference the number could range from 850 to 1,500 units. That's quite a spread, Mr. Speaker. I asked the minister, 850 units is just over half the original estimates. When will you admit your department has no plan, no direction, and is not using the federal funding to its fullest potential?
Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for giving me the opportunity to point out the importance of targeting this money to those that are in greatest need. We're talking about low-income Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, because in actual fact, the affordable housing program was actually targeted more to middle income. And the member opposite has allowed me to point out again that in Nova Scotia, we are going to target more towards the low-income Nova Scotians. And in order to do that, it's going to require a larger subsidy, and that is why the $850 to $1,500, yes, we could do $1,500, but we'd be missing the people that are in greatest need of affordable housing, and we will not let them down.
The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since July of 2003, the people of Annapolis and the workers of Britex have been told that the government goal was to have an operating and sustainable entity in the form of Britex plant. But yesterday it was reported that NSBI is only accepting liquidation offers. My question to the Minister of Economic Development is, has the direction changed from looking for a viable alternative for Britex to one where you are selling off assets and abandoning the 80 families who are out of work?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as we all know, regrettably, Britex ran into financial difficulties a number of months ago. NSBI, who is the major creditor in this action, allow or put Britex into receivership. A receiver is appointed, and the receiver over the last number of months have been dealing with a number of parties who had an interest in continuing the operation. As far as I know from NSBI at this point, that none of those have been successfully received.
Order, please. Order, please. There's too much noise in the chamber. It's very difficult for the clerks and myself to hear the questions and answers. The honourable member for Annapolis on the first supplementary.
The concern in my riding, Mr. Speaker, is that the province is willing to go forward with the short-term gain of selling the assets of Britex when in the long term, the economic and financial loss of Britex closing will be felt by the Nova Scotia government for years to come. My question is the minister prepared to sit down with the former employees of Britex who made a world-class product to exhaust all possibilities for an ongoing business, and if so, when?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the honourable member knows, through a number of discussions and meetings, Britex is in the hands of the receiver, and certainly the major credit is NSBI Crown Corporation. As I've relayed to the honourable member over the last number of months, if the employee group has an offer for them to please quickly approach the receiver through the last number of months, and I'm sure that at this point the receiver is still there. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Employees are looking for some direction from the Department of Economic Development. The last time the province supported rural economic development was in early 1999. The previous government loaned Britex in excess of $3 million with conditions. My question is, will the minister table in this House by the end of the day documentation showing that those conditions surrounding the loan were met, and what steps his department took to ensure that the jobs at Britex were being protected?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as the honourable member knows, the dollars that were loaned to Britex are still outstanding. NSBI is responsible as the main creditor, and those dollars are the reason that the receiver is now in charge.
The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage. Mr. Speaker, according to Department of Tourism figures, more and more potential visitors to Nova Scotia are getting their information through the internet. They don't just look up our own website, Mr. Speaker. They check out online publications like RV Times. I'll table an article from this publication. RV Times. I'll quote, following the Nova Scotia Tourism Bureau Scenic Marine Drive route, we headed south towards Halifax. The first section is really bad road, and 40 kilometers was average, and end quote. Really bad was in capital letters, Mr. Speaker. I asked the Minister of Tourism and Culture and Heritage, is this the kind of advertising your government is happy to have potential visitors reading?
Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, the member is right. The Internet, Mr. Speaker, has indeed become a source of information for our visitors, Mr. Speaker. In fact, over 400% increase on our website activity last year alone, Mr. Speaker. That speaks well to the job that the department is doing and the staff that are doing that job and our industry, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, roads are an issue for tourism. And my colleague beside me here, the Minister of Transportation, I believe is doing a fine job of investing millions more each and every year.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Now, member for Sackville-Cobequid on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. They're traveling on the web, and we want them to travel in our province. So, I'll continue to the quote, Mr. Speaker. Shortly after leaving Lunenburg, we discovered that the rough roads had taken their toll on our bike. A key weld had fractured and allowed our front wheel of our outer bike to drag on the pavement. This incident dampened our enthusiasm to continue the lighthouse route towards Yarmouth. End quote. My question to the minister: This isn't the only publication online or otherwise to criticize our bad roads. When will your government going to recognize the damage our poor infrastructure is doing to our tourism in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism and Culture.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, it is this government, Mr. Speaker, who has increased funding to transportation year after year after year since coming into this government, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure that member and all members that we will continue to make that type of investment for tourism, for economic development, and to grow this province in a direction that it should be going, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Cobequid on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll table a write-up from Yahoo Travel that also criticizes our roads. Quote, the 100 series highways are reasonably well maintained. Watch out for the frequent potholes on the other roads. Mr. Speaker, I ask the Minister of Transportation, these negative impressions of our province are counterproductive to expanding our tourism industry. When can we expect a nonpartisan, multi-year plan to fix our roads for residents and tourists alike?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism or Transportation and Public Works.
Thank you very, very much for the question. I truly appreciate that because it gives me the opportunity to bring the honourable member up to speed, Mr. Speaker. First of all, the stretch of highway that he's speaking of, between Martins River and Mahone Bay, is out to tender at the present time, as a matter of fact. So, but Mr. Speaker, that isn't the point.
You can check the Internet and find that out.
That isn't the point, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, for the last about 20 years now, every year the Department of Transportation has gone out to the public with a survey to determine public satisfaction with the highways in Nova Scotia. And it's been up and down, primarily down during the Liberal years. And Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, over the past 4 or 5 years, it's shown a steady increase. And I'd be very pleased to inform the House that at the present time, the satisfaction rate in Nova Scotia is 60%, which is the highest it's been since, I believe, about 1988.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West. Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, too, is to the Minister of Transportation and Public Works. If you take time to travel down any road in this province, you'll see that they're full of potholes and ruts. Very poor condition is very obvious. There's potholes, there's sinkholes, there's washouts on the shoulders. Motors are damaged in their vehicles. We're hearing about it every day in our constituency office. So I want to ask the Minister of Transportation, when can Nova Scotians expect a nonpartisan, stepwise plan to address the very poor condition of our secondary roads?
The Honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Speaker, unfortunately, when we came back into government in the year 1999, we inherited a system that had fallen into disrepair from 1993 until 1999. Mr. Speaker, it's astounding that in the 80s, in the 1980s, we were spending over $100 million per year on the capital side of transportation. During the Liberal years, Mr. Speaker, during that period from 1993 to 1999, when we came back into power, their expenditures on capital expenditures on this province on highways was $36 million.
The honourable member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Under both Liberal and Tory governments, our highways have deteriorated in this province. If you travel over these roads, not only is it an expense and an inconvenience to motorists, but certainly also they can be dangerous. Pauline McCullough wrote a letter to the editor in the Truro Daily News recently, outlining an incident where she temporarily lost control of her car after hitting a pothole on Highway 104. And certainly we all know the lack of guardrails has been in the news, two high-profile tragedy cases in recent years. So my question to the minister, what assurances can he give drivers like Mrs. McCullough that the roads that she travels on will be safe?
The honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Speaker, I can give a commitment to the lady in question that we will continue to improve our highways. We will continue to improve them for the next many several years that we will continue in power in this province.
The honourable member for Pictou West on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as we know, Transportation and Public Works has been a vulnerable department when it comes to Tory budget cuts in past years. Operations have been consolidated, services have been contracted out, and our roads are showing the results. Mr. Speaker, my final question to the minister, when is your government going to stand up and have a long-term plan to address the condition of our secondary roads and to keep drivers safe?
The honourable Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Mr. Speaker, that is a base canard. We have not decreased the amount of money that we've spent on the highways in this province. And Mr. Speaker, further to that, Mr. Speaker, today we have better equipment than we've ever had for snow removal, for ice control. Mr. Speaker, we have people out there that are trained properly to accommodate the needs of our highway system. Mr. Speaker, I am very, very proud of the Department of Transportation, the people that work for it. We're doing a great job, and Mr. Speaker, the government is supporting the department by providing on a continuing basis increases in the budget, as that honourable member will see tomorrow.
The honourable member for Kings West.
On June the 18th, a significant employer and contributor to economic vitality in the Annapolis Valley will be closing its doors. More than 80 full-time, 55 seasonal employees will be out of work once Avon Foods shuts down its operation. Mr. Speaker, this on top of the fact that unemployment rates in rural Nova Scotia are substantially higher than the national average for rural areas. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development. What assurances can I give these employees and their families that this government is in fact interested in their well-being and has taken steps to ensure that they will be able to remain in their communities and continue to raise their families?
The honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And certainly it's extremely unfortunate, the announcement on Avon Foods, and certainly since that time staff from the Department of Economic Development as well as staff from the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries have met with the local people involved at the plant. We've had contact and discussions with the parent owners of the plant to see what opportunities still remain at that plant to continue to employ people from the Valley of Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Kings West on your first supplementary.
True to the matter, Mr. Speaker, not only will these employees and their families feel the impact of this closure, but so will many farmers and producers who are depending on this company as a market for their produce. Some farmers will experience as much as $100,000 in lost revenue. Now all they have in their backyard is a 1,000 square foot processing plant sitting empty because the government has done nothing to attract new business. Will the minister tell me what he has done and table any correspondence he may have sent to Avon Foods' parent company expressing his interest in finding alternative uses for this facility.
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And as I said previous, our departments have had contact with the parent company and their CEO, and we continue to have discussions to see what opportunities there are in the future for that facility that would employ Nova Scotians in the Apples Valley.
Now, member for Kings West on your final supplementary.
This government talks about the importance of rural economic development in Nova Scotia, yet in the past few months, numerous companies have closed for business. Facts are that rural companies are not enjoying the economic prosperity realized in Metro. Will the minister give some reassurance to rectify laid-off employees throughout rural Nova Scotia, recently laid off, that their government is doing something, anything, to allow them to live, work, and raise families in rural Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Economic Development, you have about 10 seconds.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I certainly will give that assurance. At each and individual case, people from department staff work very closely with those affected.
Order,
but I'd
please.
also
Order, please. Order, please. Order, please. Time allotted for question period has expired. Opposition members' business. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call resolution number 493?
Resolution number 493. The Honourable just before I recognize the Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis, the Honourable Member for Yarmouth on introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you, Mr. Speaker, and to all members of the House, I'd like to introduce two guests in the East Gallery, or the East Wing, maybe it is, I'm not sure. But anyhow, Mr. Speaker, they've been longtime friends of my family for a number of years. They're business people in the Yarmouth County area. Their only weakness is they live in the Argyll municipalities. But on behalf of the Honourable Christy Ontomon and myself, and to all members, I'd like to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Wayne Robbishaw to the House today.
So we welcome our special guest to the gallery today, the Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand and speak on the rural depopulation of this province. Mr. Speaker, the economies of rural Nova Scotia have been in decline, and the number of young people leaving our rural towns and communities is far too great. Nova Scotia, at the time of Confederation, had a strong and vibrant economy, supported by the prosperity of each and every community, from one end of our great province to the other. Industries like farming in the Annapolis Valley, shipbuilding on the South Shore, fishing in Guysborough, Yarmouth, and in Digby, forestry on the Eastern Shore, mining in Cape Breton and Amherst, created the backbone of our great society. Our province was prosperous because our small communities were prosperous. My Liberal Party, the Liberal Party, has a vision to begin rebuilding the strength of rural communities. We envision a day not too long from now when the strength of Nova Scotia's economy is measured once again by the strength of all of its communities, and not just those within an hour from Halifax. Mr. Speaker, this is a message you have heard before, and it is usually followed by words like, "We promise to study," or "We intend to put together a committee." Well, my friends, you will not hear those words today. Instead, I want to lay before you an action plan which begins to be implemented the day after the election of a Liberal government. Our party has asked many questions, and we have listened to the answers. We have put together a comprehensive package of initiatives that we believe will stimulate our rural economies. Our party has listened to the concerns of rural business, and we understand the frustration that they must feel when you try to take your products to market or try and attract customers to your business. The crumbling infrastructure in rural Nova Scotia places an unfair burden on you and in many cases discourages investment in the first place. That is why we believe the backbone of any growing economy is a transportation system that will serve the needs of the people. For too long, our roads have been made to suffer in the name of fiscal restraint, while our rural economies suffer as a result. It is the Liberal Party and the Liberal Party alone who will guarantee the taxes you pay at the pumps will once and for all be pumped back into the roads, 100%. Mr. Speaker, developing the infrastructure is only one step in a long journey back to the robust rural economies experienced during the Confederation. It is going to take coordination and strategic investment by a government organized whose sole purpose is to develop our rural economies. To attract investment in Halifax, you need a specific approach. This is also true for attracting investment in rural Nova Scotia. And even as the one-size-fits-all does not work. What is successful in Digby may not work in Inverness or Shelburne. Our province has unique challenges, and therefore government must develop unique solutions. We believe that this responsibility must not be contained to a single unit of a larger department, so that it is why we want to see the creation of the Department of Rural Economic Development. This department's one and only objective will be to assist business in rural Nova Scotia and to attract investment and opportunities for new business to come to your communities. The Minister will work with local community and economic development groups, rural municipalities, and other stakeholders to generate opportunities based on each area's strengths. We are committed to ensuring economic growth and opportunity is shared among all regions of Nova Scotia and will task a cabinet minister with that specific priority. The minister will work on behalf of the rural economy and will fight for you at the cabinet table week in and week out. Mr. Speaker, an economy is only as strong as the people who work in it. How many of you will go home tonight in a room full of pictures, mostly young people, who have gone down the road? Our children are moving out of rural communities and into the cities to start their careers. Mr. Speaker, I've worked all my life in the fishing industry in Nova Scotia rural communities, and I have built 2 or 3 different businesses. And this past year, I've had to give them over to my children to keep them here in this area, and that's the reason I'm standing here today. The banks will not look at young people who want to start up businesses in rural Nova Scotia. They turn them away, say go somewhere else. So where do they go? Mr. Speaker, we want to attract investment. We need a workforce, and we want to keep our children in our communities. We have to make it attractive for them. Our party has developed a plan we call Stay at Home in Nova Scotia. This plan puts forward for new graduates and those young people learning a skill at an incentive packages from the government to stay and to work and raise a family in our wonderful rural communities. We come to rural communities because we love the way of life. We stay because they offer a future for our families. I personally know of a lot of the people who have left, who have children in western parts of this country who have left home. And I also know that some of these parents are actually moving out west themselves because they feel they're not going to see their grandchildren grow up. Mr. Speaker, as I said before, workers and entrepreneurs will only go where there is work or opportunity. Many small rural businesses look for investment from our private lending institutes only to be turned away. We say that this is not right. We think it is time government stepped up to the plate and created alternative sources of venture capital for those entrepreneurs who want to take a chance on our rural economies. That is why a Liberal government will mandate Nova Scotia's public pensions funds to invest 1% of their capital in new Nova Scotia companies. The approximately $30 million this represents will be put into a venture capital pool that will make strategic investment into Nova Scotia businesses. All investments decisions will be made by the pension fund manager at arm's length from the government. The investments will be made for sound financial and business reasons and will not discriminate on the basis of geography. A sound business plan in Digby is no less valuable than a sound business plan in Halifax. The venture capital pool will make it easier for our entrepreneurs to access the financing they need to launch and grow their businesses. It will help grow Nova Scotia's economy and create new jobs right here in rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, our primary industries, including agriculture and fishery, are the backbone of our province. They played key roles in building Nova Scotia through the centuries and still remain big business. More than that, they are also ways of life for rural Nova Scotians and are essential to maintaining the strength and vitality of rural areas. We must continue to build our primary industries so they remain as strong in the future as they have been in the past. The Liberal Party will work closely with agriculture and fishery sectors to address its concerns, and in doing so, will review the decisions to eliminate the production and technology branch of the Department of Agriculture and Fisheries and outsource crop specialist service. We will ensure farmers receive maximum value both in terms of the specialist service offered and the cost to farmers and taxpayers. As well, it is our intention to establish an emergency agriculture management officer to coordinate resources and respond to crises such as the mad cow scare in Western Canada and the resulting closed borders to the United States for Nova Scotia's beef. Mr. Speaker, as we grow our rural economies, it will be imperative that business can remain competitive as well as hold on to the skilled workers they employ. Adapting to new technologies and keeping your workforce current is a necessity in today's economy. Business must be given the opportunity to retrain its workforce to meet these changes head on. We propose Talent Works, an initiative that would see government put in place a 20% tax credit for the cost of retraining employees. Mr. Speaker, as many of us have seen over the past weeks, the government is considering reducing service in our rural hospitals, or some cases, the elimination of rural hospitals and schools altogether. As Liberals, we believe this is wrong. We have told the government this is short-sighted and could bring an end to many of our rural communities. How can we expect to attract investment or a skilled workforce to rural Nova Scotia if the government is not willing to invest in basic public service? And it's not just health care and schools. Parents want to know their children will have strong access to public school systems and the opportunity to grow and learn. Putting money into health care and education in rural Nova Scotia should not be seen as a burden by government, but rather an investment in our future economy. The economy of the past was built on the strength of all parts of Nova Scotia, big and small, and the only thing stopping us from getting there again is the political will to invest into our people. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for the Honourable Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise today to talk on the resolution put forward by the honourable member. There's a number of things I think that's extremely important to be discussed here today and to point out to the House and all Nova Scotians. First of all, this government, unlike the previous government, does have an overall comprehensive plan. This government is extremely concerned about opportunities and employment in rural Nova Scotia. And that's why, under that comprehensive approach, we've addressed and began to work on critical infrastructure such as the roads. The previous government had eroded the money in the capital budget for roads, which is the most critical part of infrastructure for rural Nova Scotia, whether it's tourism, health protection, local industry, and to get our goods to a product and get our supplies to communities across rural Nova Scotia. They had decreased the budget to $36 million, the former Liberal government, and I'm pleased to say last year it was well in excess of $112 million back in the capital. So we're seeing improvements in our road, which is a critical infrastructure, whether it's tourism operations in rural Nova Scotia, whether it's farming operations, manufacturing, or whatever. I'm also pleased as Minister responsible for economic development to give the true facts on what's taking place in this province. Under our economic growth strategy, Opportunity for Prosperity, we have seen employment levels rise in this province in 5 short years of over 40,000 people, Mr. Speaker. That's a huge achievement in a province of less than 1 million people. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, the latest Stats Canada statistics show that 442,000 Nova Scotians are working as of their last month's statistics. Also, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note, even though the national average in other provinces has been going down, in February, 2,000 more full-time jobs were created in Nova Scotia, as well as in March, 3,000 more jobs were created in the province of Nova Scotia. Those are the reason for those, Mr. Speaker. This government works very hard with the business and people of Nova Scotia, creating a climate for business growth and for new people to enter our job market here and for new businesses to grow, and just as important for existing industries to expand. And that's not to say that there are not individual industries or businesses that are going to from time to time have difficulties, whether it's foreign markets, whether it's financial issues concerning banks, whether it's financial issues concerning the overall economy. But this province is certainly illustrated by the figures, and certainly conversations I have with business people and citizens throughout this province see a change in momentum and see a new direction over the last 5 years where this province has gained its financial footing. We're balancing budgets, and we're doing that in paying for increased health care services, increased education services, increased roads by growth in our own economy. And Nova Scotians are proud people and proud to work and proud to contribute to the province. Some of the individual programs, Mr. Speaker, that this government has initiated is the Nova Scotia Nominee Program. And this program, in conjunction with the Federal Immigration Department, targets individuals who would invest and lived here in Nova Scotia and create unemployment opportunities. As well, it also targets individuals who have professions or skills that would benefit communities in Nova Scotia, and specifically, obviously, rural communities we're targeting for those individuals. And since that program began earlier this year, almost 50 certificates have been issued through that program, and another 4 applications are currently being processed. And the momentum is building, and work will continue on this program. And as part of the overall government strategy dealing with immigration. I want to speak a moment about the reality of Nova Scotia, and that's small business. They make up 90% of the business community here in Nova Scotia, and about 1/3 of our entire workforce, Mr. Speaker. Small business contributes about 25% to our gross domestic product, and they pay almost $3 billion in wages. Many of these businesses, Mr. Speaker, as you know, the same in your communities, are located in rural Nova Scotia. And access to capital is critical as small businesses expect to grow and flourish in all areas of the province. And as the previous speaker noted that concern, we also are aware of that concern and been working on that problem for the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm proud to stand here in my place today and talk about the Credit Union Small Business Loan Guarantee Program that this government initiated a year ago. Under that program, there's $8 million specifically targeted to small business around this province. And under those terms, maximum loans to $150,000 are available to Nova Scotia businesses, with the province of Nova Scotia guaranteeing 75% of that total. And give an indication of how successful this program has been since last fall, there's more than $3.4 million have been provided to businesses across Nova Scotia as we speak. And those businesses contribute in a large way to our rural economies because, Mr. Speaker, there truly are small businesses. Community Economic Development Investment Funds, or CEDIFs, are also a proven vehicle for venture capital in rural areas. And I'm proud to say under this government's tenure, more than 23 funds are now in existence, with over $10 million capital available for small businesses throughout most rural communities across these provinces. And Mr. Speaker, these are made in Nova Scotia funds. They're Nova Scotians supporting Nova Scotians and proud to do it. There are also, there will be 7 new funds, I might add, Mr. Speaker, in the coming year, and that also demonstrates the key interest in communities investing in themselves. When you have communities that believe in themselves, who take pride in themselves, they invest their money in themselves, and that causes that key economic growth, job maintenance, job retention, and new jobs are formed. Also, Mr. Speaker, it's key to note that our local regional economic development groups in Nova Scotia, with this province funds its share of and supports strongly, play a large role in identifying, as you know, business opportunities and companies who would like to expand, who need financing, who need management, who need help with business studies. The entire gamut, the RDAs, explore those opportunities in local communities and then help those individuals come forward to use either commercial institutions, NSBI, the lending Crown Corp agency for the province and business promotion, growth and retention, as well various programs that they can access through the Office of Economic Development, the ministry that I'm responsible for. So I think, Mr. Speaker, those individual organizations do a great job in promoting opportunities to and exploit opportunities that allow more of our citizens in rural Nova Scotia to be employed in their communities and allow growth to occur there. Another key infrastructure component, the same as roads and utilities, certainly is the information technology and the telecommunication network. And I'm proud to comment that there are over 350 CAP sites in this province that provide high-speed internet access to individuals and businesses in every corner of this province. As well, through the RDAs and regional associations, we continue to support large broadband, high-speed internet connections to more and more communities, as well as high-speed fiber optic networks. And through most of these, we are partnered with Industry Canada, of course, and we've taken advantage of those opportunities as a province, and we are the most connected province in the country, and certainly that's a stat we're proud of. Whether you're running a business, whether you're an entrepreneur, an author, the access to high-speed internet allows you to do that same work in your local community, whether it's Port Grenville, Mr. Speaker, or downtown Halifax. And that's absolutely key to the vital growth of rural Nova Scotia, is having access to those telecommunications and business linked. And certainly we've employed that strategy as well through the hub and spoke connections with our contact centers to provide opportunities to rural communities from Liverpool to Canso. Those opportunities would not be available if that investment had not been made and those communities were not connected. I want to talk a moment about the Cape Breton Growth Fund, which is a regional fund that we participate in. And the Cape Breton Growth Fund has invested more than $60 million in 30 projects, Mr. Speaker, and provided more than 2,900 jobs in that vital region of the province. And this province has contributed $12 million to that growth fund, and it continues to be a key source of provincial and federal funding to allow job opportunities for new people who want to place business there, as well as retention of and expansion of businesses within the Cape Breton zone for the Cape Breton Economic Growth Fund. As well, Mr. Speaker, another area that we've begun to support in Nova Scotia is the design of the Supplier Development Program that will be unveiled along with the branding program later on this year, which will not only promote Nova Scotia products, goods, and services to Nova Scotians, but that kind of quality, expertise, and experience to the world, because we have a great success story here, and it's an opportunity to tell that story and promote growth and job expansions for Nova Scotians at the same time, Mr. Speaker. As well, I think it's important to note that on the skills and competitive agenda, we're the most educated workforce here in Nova Scotia in all of Canada. Over half of our population, Mr. Speaker, have post-secondary education, and certainly this government has provided an unheard of investment of $125 million into the community college system. Because, Mr. Speaker, as this government knows, and as Nova Scotians know, education and training is the key to allowing Nova Scotians to acquire jobs and remain in their province and in their communities across this province. And whether it's dynamic positioning simulators to aid in offshore, whether it's the upgrading of training and services and facilities through the entire community college as well as university system in this province, it is the absolute key, Mr. Speaker, in ensuring our young people have job opportunities. We work closely with employers in this province to come up with the opportunities where the training is needed, where the opportunities exist. And Mr. Speaker, as you well know, that is at times a process that requires lead time. When an industry is ready to expand or a company, many times the type of specific training or skills they need are not readily available in the community. If we do not have the process in place, if we're not able to identify those opportunities, then those are missed opportunities for Nova Scotians, and certainly missed opportunities for Nova Scotians in rural communities where those individual jobs are vital to the maintenance of that infrastructure. Certainly this province and this government specifically recognizes that right down to the primary grade level. With introductions of new programs, some early learnings to returning to the 3 Rs, we're reestablishing that strong educational base in this province, and we're doing it in rural communities with strong, brand new educational facilities. This government is building more schools than any government in the history of this province, and I'm proud to be a member of that government because we take education and training seriously, Mr. Speaker. it's the real building block to opportunity for our young people across this province. As well, that education and that diversity is not limited to just the offshore. It's not limited just to IT. It encompasses the entire band of what is needed there by employers in Nova Scotia to create those opportunities and to ensure that we have the skilled workforce in this province to take advantage of that. As well, this province is committed to the health of Nova Scotians. This province, or this government, is building new hospitals. It's acquiring more doctors, nurses, and healthcare professionals. It's ensuring that the budget and the dollars is there year over year, that healthcare needs of Nova Scotians can be maintained, and that the funding, as critically, is sustainable. And it's doing that in a climate of balanced budgets. And that's absolutely key, as you know, Mr. Speaker, to allowing those new dollars that we acquire through economic growth to be invested back in our economy and stop the cycle of interest payment expenditures. This government has come a long way in achieving those goals with operating balanced budgets, and at the same time ensuring that the priorities of Nova Scotians are met and maintained. That type of foresight certainly is one that's critical if we're going to have a government that exploits the opportunities of the future. And Mr. Speaker, this province has a bright future, and it has a great future. We've been able, as a government, to create a climate for economic growth. Businesses have responded, and you've seen those significant increases in people employed in this province. The fall of the unemployment level across this province, and we've seen a prosperity and hope from Nova Scotians returning. It's extremely important, Mr. Speaker, and I certainly say it to all members of the House and to Nova Scotians. We are on the right track in this province. We're seeing sustained growth in our economy. We're seeing improvements in our health care, our education, and Mr. Speaker, as you and I are both aware, as we travel quite some distance to come to Halifax, we've got better roads too, and I'm proud of it. Thank you.
I recognize the honourable member for Halifax-Chebucto.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much. The decline in rural population is hardly a new phenomenon. Indeed, if we look at StatsCan information for Nova Scotia or for any province in Canada, we will see that this has gone on for a long time. Indeed, this is a phenomenon which has characterized life in our province for at least 10 years and probably more like 15 or 20 years. That means, of course, that the decline has gone on not just, as was suggested by the original resolution that came from the Liberal Party, the decline has gone on not just through years in which there have been Tory administrations, but indeed it predated that and included time when the Liberal Party was the government of this province. That's worth remembering because it indicates that it's a chronic problem. And it indicates, because we know it's a national phenomenon, that it's not purely something about Nova Scotia. Nonetheless, of course, that does not relieve us from the obligation to try to do something about it. If one looks at those same statistics and asks the question, where are the people who are leaving the rural areas going, then the answer becomes quite obvious. Those people who are leaving the rural areas of Nova Scotia are moving to HRM. We know from the tracking that's done of the population that that indeed is where people who leave the honourable member's home county of Digby and who leave Annapolis and who leave Inverness and who leave Victoria and who leave Shelburne and Queens and Yarmouth County, that's where they go. They come to HRM. Now, of course, not 100%. Some move to other parts of the country, as indeed some people who grew up in HRM move to other parts of Canada, to larger cities. But that's the trend. The trend is clearly for people to move out of the rural areas into the urban areas. And indeed, if one looks at the unemployment figures, the unemployment level in HRM is on a par with the Canadian national average, and yet in virtually no other part of Nova Scotia is the unemployment level so low. In every other part of the province of Nova Scotia, Cape Breton Island, or any other part of the rural mainland outside of HRM, the unemployment figures are much higher. They're much higher than the Canadian average. So there is a real problem there. But the economic opportunities are here in Metro. That seems to be where people have moved and where, in fact, they're finding the opportunity in order to build lives for themselves. This is a reflection of the way in which the national economy has changed. The national economy is no longer purely resource-based. People can no longer assume that with a low level of education, they can drop out of school in grade 6, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, and go to work in the fishery, go to work in forestry, go to work in agriculture, and make a living sufficient to support themselves and their families. That's just not the state of play, even in those resource-based sectors of the economy. Think, for example, about forestry. Forestry has transformed itself so that, in fact, the reliance upon sophisticated machinery is now something that is a fact of life in forestry. And I'm not just talking about working in the woods, I'm also talking about working in lumber mills or in pulp and paper plants. This requires a higher level of education and training, and it means that more and more people who, if they decide not to pursue their education, will be left out of the modern transformed economy, even those sectors that continue to rely upon natural resources. That's just the way of it. Now, when the present government first came to power in 1999, they had a declared policy of trying to cut back on government expenditures, trying to make economies in all departments. And they set up a voluntary planning task force to go out and examine all areas of government expenditure and to come back and advise them about ways in which they could save money, ways in which they could stop spending money. And indeed, the Voluntary Planning Task Force did that for them. In January of 2000, a report came from voluntary planning. But you know what that task force said? And I was glad to hear the Minister of Economic Development reminding himself, reminding his caucus, and reminding this chamber that education had to be the way forward in Nova Scotia. Because that's indeed what voluntary planning said. They said, we are very surprised to find ourselves saying this, but this government, no matter what it may cut back on, has to invest much more money in education. They said that the only way forward for Nova Scotians is through greater education, that's the way of the future. That is the transformed way of the economy. Fewer and fewer people are going to be able to make jobs in the resource-dependent sectors of the economy. Look how agriculture has transformed itself over the last 100 years. 100 years ago, what was it, 60, 70, 75% of the Canadian population was engaged in agriculture. And now, it's no more than 1 or 2%. That's because the nature of agriculture has changed. It's because it's become much more mechanized. It's because the farms are much bigger and people have complex pieces of machinery and they're able to feed the whole of the Canadian population, plus huge surpluses are generated, but only 1 or 2% of the population has to be employed to do that. So these things are changing, and this is true in the fishery, and it's true in forestry, it's true in agriculture, it's true in mining. So these aren't necessarily going to be huge generators of jobs. We have to recognize that the future is in another direction, and yet this isn't really what our government has learned as the lesson. It's not really the way in which they're moving. Now, I heard some sensible suggestions, I have to say, from the honourable member who brought the resolution to the House and spoke to it. Some of his suggestions are quite good, but his party was in power for many years and didn't move on them. They didn't move on them. A Department of Rural Economic Development, where was that? It never was there. Mandatory investment from public pension plans for local businesses, never did it. These are worth investigating, but they're not there. And what about the present government? They haven't really done the job that's necessary to do in order to bring prosperity as equally as possible across this province. Because the honourable member was correct when he said it was desirable, very desirable, to maintain economic viability all across the province. That would be wonderful. I'm not meaning to suggest that there should only be economic prosperity here in HRM. It's the hard fact, but if we could bring economic prosperity to all areas of the province, that would be terrific. That would be a desirable public policy objective. It's something that we should pursue. But it won't happen with the policies of the present government. Think about what they've done. Think about, despite the minister speaking about education, what they've really done over the last 5 years. There are two things that they've done that they seem to think are going to help the communities outside of HRM develop economically. Now, one has been the emphasis on the offshore, and the other has been call centers. Now, let's be clear. Over the last 5 years, there has generally been a very good time in the Canadian economy. The Nova Scotia economy has generated new jobs. Not as many jobs proportionately or by any standard as many other provinces in Canada, but we've generated new jobs. So our economic performance was good, but it was under par compared with other parts of the country. And yet, look at the jobs that have been generated in Nova Scotia. 50% of those jobs that have been generated since 1999, when that government came to power, have been in call centers. Now, what kind of future is that? Mr. Speaker, in the communities that have received call centers, I know that those jobs have been very welcome. You think about a place like New Waterford that was in desperate need of a shot in the arm in terms of some jobs. Well, it's been very desirable for those communities that have been in receipt of call centers to have those jobs. But the question is, how permanent are they? Has there ever been a strategy to keep those jobs in our province? That's been missing. It's just been missing. And we know that those companies, all of which are foreign-owned, all of which are highly mobile, all of which could be located anywhere in the world, are here only because of the subsidies that are offered on a temporary basis for a few years by this government. And as soon as those subsidies are up, there's nothing in place to guarantee or even tend towards keeping these jobs here. And we've already seen an instance in which one of those companies is suggesting that some of its jobs are going to be placed in India. Well, this is no big surprise. This is a phenomenon in the United States. Indeed, it's a big issue in the United States presidential elections going on right now this year. And India is a logical place for call centers to go. They don't have to be anywhere in particular, so long as that they're at the end of a telephone line or able to be reached electronically, which they can be. There's a middle class in India that has some level of education, and they speak English. Well, they can deal with the American public, which are the customers for these call centers. Doesn't have to be in Nova Scotia. Indeed, the Financial Pages reported just recently that IBM just bought a big Indian call center company. Smart. Good for IBM. Makes sense. But it tells you where the future of that industry is, the future of the call center industry. It's not necessarily in Nova Scotia. It's probably going to be in India. The wage rate is lower. That's the secret of the success of the Indians competing for those jobs. We cannot assume that Nova Scotia is going to keep those jobs. We should assume, the government should assume exactly the opposite. They should assume that however useful as a temporary transition measure call center jobs are, that's all they are. That is only going to give those jobs to those communities for a short period of time. And you know something else? Those companies don't buy their land and their buildings. They rent them. They lease them. Occasionally, as we saw down in Liverpool, They leave the local municipality and the county holding the bag when they walk away from it. They didn't own the property. They didn't own the property. The point is, they're not making investment here in Nova Scotia. That at least would give them some kind of hook, some kind of investment in our community, something that would indicate that they were thinking of staying around. They're not. They're here temporarily and only because of the subsidies. Well, that's not much of a strategy. It's a losing strategy, and this government has to face up to the fact that as soon as the 5 to 7 year financial subsidies that they've put in place for more than 50% of those jobs that they've created or that have been created in Nova Scotia disappear, those communities are going to be in just as much trouble as they were before. The question is, what's the transition strategy after that? Now, what about the offshore? I said there was a second big attempt to try to generate jobs in Nova Scotia associated with the offshore. And this, in fact, goes back primarily to the Liberal Party, but it's been embraced as much by the PCs as by the Liberals. People had stars in their eyes. People had stars in their eyes about what the offshore was going to do for Nova Scotia. They thought we were going to be like Alberta. And in fact, I think the present Minister of Energy still has those stars in his eyes. He thinks that we're not going to ever have sales taxes, there'll be no unemployment, that we'll have a heritage fund, all because of our energy riches in Nova Scotia. And you know what? That isn't true. It hasn't happened, and it isn't going to happen. There just are not the resources out there. Look at the cutbacks in exploration that are going on right now. This is highly problematic for Nova Scotia. We have not been able to generate the jobs here at a level that deals with unemployment, of the problems that we have, and it's particularly true that people outside of Metro have not been the major beneficiaries. The major beneficiaries of the offshore have been right here in my constituency, and in Halifax-Chebucto, and in the other Metro constituencies. This is where the lawyers and the engineers and the service companies and the helicopter companies are all located. We're the ones who have benefited from the offshore. It's not so much for Guysborough County and for Inverness County and for Digby County and for Queens, and it's just not the case that this is the case. That's fine. There's tax revenues, sure, there's tax revenues, but where are the jobs? Where are the jobs associated with it? There were never big jobs except during the construction phase. The construction phase brought jobs, especially for the overland pipeline, but not on an ongoing basis. That's the hard fact. No matter how much the Minister of Energy might wish it to be otherwise, it is simply not the case. So what we need from the government is some indication of reliable leadership when it comes to the economic development of the areas outside of HRM, because they sure need it. Now, I heard some suggestion in question period today that there ought to be increased immigration in Nova Scotia. Now, the focus in the question was on the business immigrant, on the business sector of immigrants. Now, I have to say, I would place it on a wider basis. I think that the suggestion of the question was correct, that Nova Scotia does need more immigration and more retention of immigrants. That would be a good thing for our economy. That would be excellent. I would think that we could take our Nova Scotia Business Inc. or whatever new manifestation there might be from year to year of an agency of government and pay attention to other markets than purely the United States. You know what? South of the Rio Grande, there are 300 million people who speak Spanish, and some of them speak Portuguese. Do you know how many people at Nova Scotia Business Inc. speak Spanish? Zero. Zero of them speak Spanish. That is a big mistake. We have to be afoot in a wider part of the world. Now, I think there's a long agenda of things the government could be doing that they're simply not doing. Thank you.
Thank you. There's 10 seconds left on that resolution, but I guess okay, I'll recognize the honourable member for Kings West. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly pleased today with the resolution brought forth by my colleague from Annapolis, Digby, dealing with the the crisis in rural economic development. Certainly the history of Nova Scotia, if we go back 400 years to the founding of the province and the first settlement in Annapolis Royal, we know that rural Nova Scotia has had enormous prominence. And in fact, it had traditionally set the pace for growth throughout the province. However, over the last number of years, due to a whole number of factors, we know that rural Nova Scotia is no longer quite as attractive as it used to be. In the past, of course, young Nova Scotians took pride in remaining in their communities, picking up with the family farm, the fishery, the forestry, yes, our basic resources. And we know now that we've had a tremendous pattern of out-migration. While, again, the member opposite pointed out that this is indeed a national trend, rural depopulation. We know, however, that in some provinces, it has, in fact, the rate has been checked. And the rate of out-migration, rural depopulation has been checked when governments intervened. Instead of closing services and letting infrastructure continue to be neglected, when in fact it was concerted and directed energies and investments in those areas, it actually has halted the rate of decline. And I must say, rural Saskatchewan, which was a great example in my geography classes, is one example, in fact, of where rural depopulation has indeed started to slow down. In my own family, this certainly has been a topic of discussion and debate since two of my three sons, in fact, are in other parts of Canada. Well educated, one is in Calgary and one in Ontario. One with a business background and the other with a technical skill. And when they finished their training, there just were not the opportunities, certainly in the area where we live. And in speaking about the historic and beautiful Annapolis Valley, one of the reasons that, again, we have seen some decline and our unemployment rate has gone up over the last while, again, is lack of those opportunities. And agriculture has been the backbone of the Annapolis Valley. It is one of the 4 best soil areas in Canada, and we should never neglect that reality. And we know that it is indeed being threatened, of course, by other forms of development. My own belief is that, again, if we give attention to the basic resources of this province, like agriculture, and we all know there is a tremendous need to move in the direction of self-sufficiency in food production, certainly highlighted in the past year by crises like the BSE. At the current time, we only produce 30% of the beef protein that we use in this province. And what a great opportunity to move forward. And I make a really important connect here, I believe, with one of the people that I introduced here in the House yesterday, who was looking for a little bit of help to expand the business. One of those who seized the crisis and created a great opportunity, because during the BSE crisis, a small slaughterhouse that killed 10 beef a week started to promote Nova Scotia grown beef, which we know for the most part is almost, or certainly small producers, is pretty well almost organically grown. They are using grass fodder as their source of feed, so they're not caught up with commercial feed products. So therefore, he started to promote this in the restaurants, in the small meat shops, and all of a sudden, he was now needing 15, needing 20, and now had reached 35 head of cattle that he was killing per week. All of a sudden, however, the Department of Labor comes in and says that you don't have a big enough plant. There are safety issues here. So now he's on the threshold of wanting to expand his slaughter plant based on that premise, a Nova Scotia product and a top quality product. And yet he's finding a difficulty to get a little bit of provincial investment in an industry and a business and an offshoot for farmers that is sustainable. This is something which can remain, unlike the call centers that the member opposite just alluded to. Agriculture can go on, and so often we're short-sighted. We should be thinking 3 or 4 generations down the road and start to renew this industry. It's one I'm familiar with, but there are certainly others like this. If we think of the forest products of Nova Scotia, you know, we know how, for example, from very, very small beginnings, look at the way our Christmas tree industry has taken off, and the quality of our Christmas trees, again, that are exported along the eastern seaboard and now all the way down into actually Central and South America. We know that they are in enormous demand. There's an example of growing an industry. But I would say, and I see, for example, anytime I go down to Weymouth is one example where I see whole logs being exported out of the province. And once again, if we were to take those particular products and start to add value to them and get a second income from that particular product. A great example that I like to talk about is actually a third world, a developing country like Costa Rica. And Costa Rica, where its forests, its rainforests was being cut at a dramatic rate, they decided with a complete and total intervention. And they said no forest product could leave Costa Rica unless it was in the form of a finished product. And immediately it transformed business opportunity, and also, of course, we know that Costa Rica, of the 6 Central American countries, does have indeed the best economy. So here it is now, using its renewable resources, not cutting them at a rate where the biomass is not replaced each year, but rather in a sustainable fashion, and with, of course, the hardwood products coming out of Costa Rica. Obviously, they can again be a sustainable industry. I would concur that education will be at the heart of many of the new businesses, the knowledge-based businesses of the future. And I think I have a challenge to government and all of us to take a look at our universities. And again, having our universities partner stronger with small rural communities of Nova Scotia. I think of the Antigonish movement, for example, and the co-op movement in Antigonish, and how it renewed rural communities back 40, 50, 60 years ago. And I think it's a model.
Order, please. Order, please. The time for Resolution 493 has expired. So we'll now move on to the Liberal House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, would you please call Resolution 485?
Resolution 485. I recognize the Honourable Member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to rise and speak on Resolution 485. And let me begin by saying that since 1981, 37,000 people have left the municipalities. And out of that 37,000, 26,000, Mr. Speaker, left Cape Breton alone. Mr. Speaker, the backbone of any strong economy is its infrastructure. And basically, in a rural area, that begins with roads. Roads have deteriorated over a long period of time. And I believe, along with the Liberal Party, that it's time that we put the taxes that you pay at the pumps into the roads. 100%, Mr. Speaker. But that's only one step in the right direction. Investment in rural Nova Scotia by private lending institutions is limited. You've heard that from my honourable colleague from Digby Annapolis. We believe that there's a strong need to invest in our communities to create jobs in the rural area. And many of you reading this and hearing this are going to wish, when you look at pictures tonight of your loved ones, that I wish that they were home here with you instead of working and living somewhere else, creating a family, investing in the future, and using their talents that more than likely that we as parents paid for, but that somebody else in another area are benefiting from. We have to be able to offer our young graduates an incentive to stay in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. And in order to do that, policy must be flexible. This one-size-fits-all does not work anywhere, whether it's a large regional municipality or a rural area. What I would like to see, along with my Liberal colleagues, is the creation of a rural Department of Economic Development, Mr. Speaker, one that would have its own minister, one that would concentrate on rural economic development, deal with rural economic development agencies and the people that are employed in those agencies, and work along with the people to develop rural areas. Nova Scotia was always a strong province, but it was a strong province because rural areas were an integral part of the total area of Nova Scotia. But what we have now is almost like a magnet drawing everybody to one central area. They prosper, the rest of the areas are suffering. Investing in public basic services, Mr. Speaker, it's not a burden, it's an investment in the future. People have a business plan, they invest in business. Well, what's wrong with investing in our youth? That's our greatest natural resource, and keeping them home is the results of the investment. Pay to have them educated. Most of them are paying their own way, coming out with a before they even get a chance to graduate, they owe more than a mortgage to pay for their education, Mr. Speaker. And then that's a tragic burden to have to try and pay for that, plus get a job that's not a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but a long, sustainable job that will pay them enough that they can afford to live, begin their life, maybe create a business, and still pay back their student loan. Mr. Speaker, let me just concentrate on a couple of items from specific to Cape Breton itself. We can talk about Central Cape Breton, Route 223, that goes down through the center of the island, and I've always referred to anything in the center I refer to as the backbone of the island. Roads and bridges, they've been suffering for a while. The ski hill, let's go to the other end of Cape Breton. Let's go north of Smoky to the ski hill. We've got the highest ski hill in the province. What people have to realize is when it's raining up and around the Sydney area, it's snowing down there. They have all the natural snow. They have the highest ski hill, which is natural, but probably some of the worst roads to get to that ski hill. That has to be corrected, Mr. Speaker, in order for that ski hill to develop. The Going Down the Road movie, I would say, is an absolute chronological order of Cape Breton, and we've all seen that movie. A recent proposal to produce steel slabs over at the former steel plant was met with an absolute, there will never be another piece of steel created in Cape Breton. That was the attitude. I referred on another date to the 90 acres that was left there adjacent to these wonderful piers in Sydney. A lease was given for 60 acres to lay down coal to an American company, which was fine. Business people came on board, created a business plan, sent it into the province with a vision to develop the other 30 acres, and lo and behold, the 60-acre lease was withdrawn and a 90-acre lease issued, therefore forever stifling development on that area. Must have been a possibility that it may be a threat to some other area of the province, Mr. Speaker. The mussel farm down in St. Anne's Bay. 4 years of pure struggle by an independent company to get final permission to invest in the area, to grow food in which would be, what more natural of an industry could you have but growing food in a natural bay? And Mr. Speaker, 4 years is a long time for a private business to have to hold on and struggle and invest and wait and hope and finally get approval. Now, it's great that it was approved, but what about other companies who would like to come in and invest? Who would have the tenacity or the basic down-to-earth guts to hang in there that long to get that kind of approval? We're killing our own investment by having things drawn out too far. We've got departments going overboard. Let me explain that, Mr. Speaker. I'm on the phone to the local work crews of the Department of Transportation. How about fixing such and such an area? What about the potholes here? Well, they tell me, Gerald, in order to do that, they have to shut down a lane of the highway. What's the problem? Small crew, 2 hours to close the lane and to reopen it again. Because of Department of Labor rules that interfere with the Department of Transportation, they have to put up so many barriers, so many barrels, so many pylons. By the time they do that, then it takes 5 minutes to fix that hole, then it's another hour to remove all the pylons and all the barrels and all the signs. Whereas some legislation or the passing of a few proper rules allow a truck with a flashing light board on it and somebody directing traffic. They could go out and repair a 5-minute pothole should not take 2 hours and 5 minutes, Mr. Speaker. That's killing rural economy. And this is where we're fighting our own all the time with these rules and regulations. You have to have rules, yes, but these are backward rules that have to be changed. Mr. Speaker, let's touch on the assessment of Nova Scotia Power. Affects rural areas. The area that I represent has the power plant, one power plant in it. Nova Scotia Power does not want negative publicity about their assessment. When I receive my bill, I pay it. When I pay what I'm billed, Nova Scotia Power pays what they are billed, and if they bill them the proper amount, then that would be it. But no, they're being billed at a rate that is unreal. What about rural hospitals? Let's talk about the new hospital in Buchanan Memorial Hospital down in Neils Harbor. 4.5 hours to travel from there to Sydney for a person to give birth. Who would like to move into an area like that with services that are that remote that they have to travel? You see? That's on the present roads, Mr. Minister. Yes, you ought to try it. If you travel any faster than that, you'd be airborne. You need a helmet on to keep your head from hitting the roof of your car because of the potholes and the frost bumps. Since you were down there, we do have RCMP and speed limits in place now, Mr. Minister.
Order. The time for the honourable member has elapsed. I recognize the honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's very timely that this topic come forward under the name of Resolution number 485 for discussion today before the House. It is an important issue, but it's not an issue that's isolated only to Nova Scotia. It's an issue with regards to depopulation and indeed the rural-urban divide that is occurring throughout the country and in fact North America. And we've seen this decline not just since 1981. This has been decades and decades in the making, and it's something that we all share concern for those that live outside a metropolitan area or a growing area in this province, and something that we do not take lightly or take for granted in terms of its significance for our areas that are from these areas affected choose to call home, want to make it a better home and a better quality and quantity living for all. But the issue we're trying to deal with, Mr. Speaker, is addressing population change by addressing economic opportunities and advancing them.
and growing opportunities from the adversities we find ourselves in, and there are some realities we've faced. But this government has faced them head-on, have faced them in an open and transparent manner, and done it so that we have created debate over what we should do. But we've created results because we've taken action. This government has moved to ensure that the interests of small business, of growing economic and industrial opportunities for regions, has been advanced in this province. And I do want to say that you don't do it by saying there just is a blanket solution. It's region by region, community by community. That's why this government has provided multi-year funding to our regional development authorities. That's why our government introduced a small business loan program working with credit unions that are in the communities. And the decision-making over those small business loans, Mr. Speaker, are made by local and regional committees, not by head office here in Metro. We're doing that because we've listened to what small business, what communities want, and we've responded with actions and with programs. And when we talk about immigration, and in fact in question period and the issues around the provincial nominee program, it is very important. We have to recognize immigration as a cornerstone to new activity, to new investment, and a presence of new Nova Scotians that will help to stimulate and diversify rural and regional communities. It's essential that we recognize what are the drivers behind this. And again, it is not just simply picking apart at every problem, it's building solutions through opportunities. Opportunities that are only met by a government that is listening and working and participating in the solutions for a better tomorrow. Solutions. I heard my honourable colleague from Victoria the Lakes. We'll talk about issues, and I want to look at Victoria County because I think it's a prime example where you talk about population decline. Well, Mr. Speaker, there was a Liberal MLA for this period almost. For the last 15 years, they've had a Liberal MLA in that area, who was, by the way, a cabinet minister in a past government before they were thrown out. And with the Liberal MLA, working with the Liberal warden of the time, Mr. Sampson, they were at a stalemate. They were at a standstill because it had to take the Tories to go in to make the fix and to make it a right one, to work with them in Victoria County. The honourable member from Victoria Lakes talked about Ski Cape Smoky, something I was very proud of as Economic Development Minister, to go in on the grassroots, work with community to diversify. Mr. Speaker, while the Liberals had an MLA there, they won it and were silent when the hill was empty. Well, it's been people skiing all year because our government got in there, supported, and worked with those individuals from the community because they want a year-round tourism opportunity, year-round community opportunities, wellness for the citizens there to have recreational diversity. That's because the progressive Conservatives came on the scene and fixed a dilemma the Liberals tried to ignore. $15 million investing in infrastructure. The Honourable Minister of Transportation Public Works, $15 million to upgrade the bridge of the Seal Island Bridge, an economic corridor in and out of Victoria County to the CBRM to ensure that the prosperity of that region is enhanced for the long-term future. Infrastructure commitments by this minister had seen additional lane exchanges put in and passing lanes in that area so that the new economic opportunities for the gypsum mill in that area can be realized. Economic opportunities that are employing people in and around this region in rural areas. But they're dealt with by investments that are strategic, they're realistic, and they're reasonable to meet the solution to a demand that we face. I've also seen about tourism. And he talked about tourism, and the honourable member, as warden, would have been in Bedeck lots. And Bedeck has grown, and Bedeck came to a stalemate. It came to a stalemate because they couldn't, because of their infrastructure, move past. And when the honourable member from Antigonish was minister responsible for minister relations, he knew to break that stalemate, we had to make strategic investments in that community so that community could grow in water and sewer. So now what do we see? More tourism operations expanding, more investments by private business and private enterprise in that community, and more jobs being created and sustained thanks to Tories taking in the Liberals and helping bolster them up when they were void of real solutions and ideas. Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about our commitment to tourism again and culture in this community when we look at the Highland Village. With over $300,000 a year, thanks to the Minister of Tourism and Culture, investing in making it part of the Nova Scotia Museum Network. Let's not forget the Minister of Education, who supported and endorsed the community's desire and the school board's desire to see a new Rankin Memorial High School and junior complex. That's being built, Mr. Speaker, and it'll be there for the future of our community, for the youth that we want to educate. Education and educational infrastructure is a priority for this government. It's not words, it is action by the Progressive Conservatives, Mr. Speaker. Major capital investments in the Celtic Lodge, Mr. Speaker. Major capital investments in a lodge that is a signature resort in this province is an icon that this government has not neglected or negated in its significance, and ensures that people continue to have quality employment, that can anchor other development around it, and a commitment we will not be unwavering on, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, when you culminate all these great things that have been happening, positive things, dealing in a proactive manner, that the National Geographic has named Cape Breton Island as the #2 place in the world to visit. And that was because of efforts of community and government coming together to overcome some of the challenges that we face. And we have made health investments, as was indicated, in the area.
Order, please. Young member Cape Breton West on a point of order.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Certainly it may be as much a point of information as anything. When that government got elected, Cape Breton Island was rated by that same internationally renowned institution as being #1.
Minister of Energy has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, with a preponderance and a weighted balance of Liberals on the island, no wonder we're slipping. But that's going to change, Mr. Speaker. That's changing as Cape Bretoners went from 1 representative to 2 Tories, and then stats are coming up. And as we elect more Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, indeed that will change. And it will change. It will change, Mr. Speaker. But I see, my member from the member from Victoria the Lakes, my colleague from that area. Mr. Speaker, I do have to say I have an apology to offer to this House. During question period, I referred to the honourable member as Foghorn Leghorn, and Mr. Speaker, I meant no offence to the original Foghorn Leghorn at all. And I heard that member, Mr. Speaker, talk about Cisco. But he's not talking about the investments, the employment of former steelworkers, and the remediation and redevelopment of that site. He's not talking about this government's commitment to get on with the cleanup of the tar ponds, which will create jobs in that area and provide the type of momentum that National Geographic says is going to help us grow to the #1 position. Our government's there, but guess what? Where are the federal Liberals? We're still waiting. We're still waiting because they won't put their dime on the table. And the honourable member talks about 90 acres in the Cisco site. And if we give it to the member for Victoria, his slogan will be, give me 90 acres and I'll turn the economy around. Well, Mr. Speaker, we could give him 900 acres, 9,000 acres, but void of any ideas and concrete policy is going nowhere. That's why this government is creating jobs and working with real businesses that employ real Cape Bretoners, Mr. Speaker. And you want to talk about the types of things that mean something to our communities. Well, if we want to deal with depopulation, if we want to deal with the real challenge of turning that around, we have to deal with practical, pragmatic solutions that meet with the talent, the aspirations, and the ability of the people that are in those regions today, and send a message of positiveness, a message that says we are open for business in Nova Scotia and on Cape Breton Island. Cape Breton has much to offer, and in the Strait area, we're seeing examples of communities coming together, leading their future, and providing a better destiny and opportunities for all concerned. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Hants East.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'll be sharing my time with my colleague from Pictou West. I want to say that what a different world I see than the minister who just spoke. I do want to say that if they're skiing all year round in Cape Breton, he is doing something miraculous. But I'd say for the rest of you said skiing all year round, and but I think for the rest of the province it's all downhill. Mr. Speaker, this is. It's been 5 years that this government has been in power, and we still have depopulation of rural Nova Scotia. We still have decline in farmers, the number of farmers in Nova Scotia. The forestry sector has been in a downturn for 3 years now, and although not entirely the fault of this government, but I want to say that if you're going to talk about rural Nova Scotia, you have to talk about rural resources in Nova Scotia. The closure of Avon Foods is going to have a dramatic impact in the valley. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, there has been basically, if not an abandonment, but an abuse of rural Nova Scotia by this government. And we saw it first with the cuts to the Department of Agriculture. The former Minister of Agriculture spoke earlier, and I would have liked to seen the present Minister actually speak to this regard. But one of the selling points in agriculture in this province is the fact that we do have an educated industry. In other words, farmers in Nova Scotia are educated farmers. A lot of them have gone through the Nova Scotia Agricultural College. We have a diversified agriculture. And I want to say, Mr. Speaker, this is a tribute to those people. This is not a tribute to the government. This is their initiative to try to survive in an ever-changing world, and they have put out a magnificent effort to do that. But yet, resources have not been there to help them, and the province, and I cannot figure out why they still put $2.2 million into a company that actually is a Crown corporation, but seems to deem itself as a private corporation. There has been no accolades from the industry in this regard, and I would like if the minister can someday show us a price list of services and the cost for those services. I'd really like to see it, because unless something's changed, he's the shareholder for this company. When I leave here this evening, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to volunteer awards in Hants East, and if there is a group of people who sustain and promote their communities, it's the volunteers in this province, and they do it hour after hour, day after day, week after week for nothing, for no monetary reward. They do it for their own personal reward. And I want to say that there's been more downloading onto communities and volunteers to try to sustain rural communities since this government came into power than any previous government. And they should really be ashamed of themselves for what they've done. I met this morning with the Women's Institute of Upper 9 Mile River. They want to talk about agriculture. And their funding has been cut by about $10,000 since this government came into power. So what support this government has shown for rural Nova Scotia, I'm not sure where it's at, but the people in those communities don't see it. So Mr. Speaker, if there's any message that I can give, and I have one of the best tourist areas in this province along the 215, part of the Glues Cap Trail, Burncoat Head, where the highest tides in the world were measured. 3 river rafting companies, Walton Lighthouse, which is the last remaining original lighthouse in Hants East, Anthony Park, Maitland Heritage District in this province, the Lawrence House, and on, not to mention Uniacke House in Mount Uniacke. But on the 215, there is all of that and one of the worst roads in Nova Scotia. But not the worst, because I've had the minister over the worst one in Hants East, and I'm sure he'll respond by doing the appropriate duty for the people in that area. So with that, I'll relinquish my time, Mr. Speaker, but if this government is going to do something for rural Nova Scotia, I'd like to see it. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Pictou West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a privilege here to have a few minutes to talk about the problem that we all face is rural depopulation in this province. And while the minister had spoke there earlier about some of the initiatives, some of the good things that they've been doing, the bare truth of the matter is that the people are still leaving many of the rural counties in this province. 13 out of 18 provinces or counties in this province are suffering under less people than they did 5 years ago. So it continues to be a problem. And it's a problem I guess we've got to continue to work at. And well, some initiatives that the government have been doing and maybe have been working, the bottom line is that people are still leaving rural Nova Scotia, coming to HRM or coming to other parts of Canada. In fact, looking at a report that was done recently called Painting the Landscape of Rural Nova Scotia, it points out that in our province, in rural Nova Scotia, the average age is higher than in urban areas. Our unemployment rates are substantially higher, and there's less people employed in the forestry and farming and in the fishery. The counties in particular that are having the largest depopulation are Guysborough, Richmond, and Cape Breton. So our young people in particular are the ones that are leaving our counties and going elsewhere. And the reason they're doing that, of course, is that there's just no jobs, no employment for them. So I've got a couple things in the short time I have that I want to mention as suggestions or ideas that how we might help turn that problem around. In the fishery, one of the problems is when a young person wants to get into the fishery and buy boats and gear and licenses from his father or his grandfather or anybody that's in the community wants to buy from. There's something called the intergenerational transfer, and that's difficult to happen because of the tax implications. And I would suggest this government could work with the federal government under the CCRA rules, as has the province of Quebec, and to find a way to make that easier to transfer boats and gear and licenses. That's one thing that would keep young people in rural Nova Scotia if they're able to find an easy way into the fishery. In fact, the fishery, the way it's set up right now, it's becoming very concentrated, and the large corporate interests are taking over, and I think it's important that we try to stop that, to try to prevent it. And because in time, if all the corporate interests own the resource, then our people are leaving, and those that are left are almost serfs or employees of the big corporations. The same thing is true in the forest industry. There's a very large concentration of ownership of the forest resource into the large industrial owners. In fact, between what the government owns as crown land and what owned by large industrial interests, it's more than the small private interests. So I think we've got to work to ensure that there's a diversity, there's ownership is spread around, and it's not all concentrated in the hands of the corporate few. Transportation, I believe we're all aware of the very poor condition of our secondary roads. They've been described as atrocious, as deplorable, and I think we need to put an investment into our roads and our bridges in this province to overcome the deficit that we have in the usage of our secondary roads. Much more could be done and would help tourism as well. Working with groups such as in my constituency, the Alma Mount Tom Strategic Planning Group that wants to diversify the economy by building up better roads, by using provincial parks more fully, by seeing them perhaps in conjunction with a private owner or in government hands to build it into a full park. So I guess the bottom line is my suggestions are to stop the corporatization of our resource industries and work with families in our communities. Certainly strong rural families yield strong communities which make for a better province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's with pleasure and sort of regret that we have to talk about this topic in the legislature this evening. And you look at the people that are moving away from the rural areas and into the bigger cities, or just simply moving out of the province, and which is even more serious. And you look in my area, which is not considered to be a rural area, but you look at, in particular in the Prestons, with a really high rate of unemployment. In some areas, a lot of the families are forced to go to Toronto, Montreal to work, and just separates the family in an area where the family is a very important structure and the most important structure in the whole community. I think that's got to stop. It has to stop. We have to have opportunities here in Nova Scotia to keep our best and brightest young people here, to make our economy grow and grow in a solid manner. I asked the Minister of Economic Development earlier today about the outpouring of jobs and job losses and the increase in the unemployment rate in many areas of the province, and I didn't mention the Prestons. But when you look at the numbers in the rural outmigration and the problems that people have been having, the numbers are in the thousands. I mean, the total today, what we talked about, was over 10,000 jobs have been gone. Over 10,000 jobs gone out of Nova Scotia. And the minister gets up and tells me there's 3,000 new jobs. Well, that's a 7,000 job negative number. And especially when it comes to the rural areas, when population is getting older and getting young people are moving away, and the opportunities just aren't going to be there if the young people all move away. The people, the entrepreneurs that start the business and work and do things and make sure that there's businesses there and people there to follow on. And you know, the basic things, the things that you need most. We need basic internet service all over Nova Scotia. I don't see the government with an initiative to make that happen. You need cell phone service all over the province to make sure that there's good communications all over the province. You need roads, you need good roads. And I can tell you from driving in my riding, which used to be a PC riding, there hasn't been any money spent there in a long time. And some of the roads are in, yeah. So when you look at that, and you look at the poor condition of the roads, that I'm sure the Honourable Minister of Transportation has every intention in the world of repairing. The question is when, would be the really question. But it's been quite a problem. Infrastructure like that in an area where it's impossible for people to safely go to work, and I might add that I've got 4 broken springs, and out of the 4 broken the springs I do have in my car, which all have to be replaced for riding over our great roads. So it's a lot of laughter from the other side, and it may be funny to some people, but I can afford to fix my car, but there's a lot of people in my riding that can't afford to fix their cars, and people that have to fix themselves. And it may be, again, it may be funny, but there's a lot of people that can't afford to fix their cars, and they need those cars to go to work. So when you look at the basic infrastructure and the structure that has to be there to encourage rural economic development, it simply isn't there. I mean, rural Nova Scotia is one of the finest places to live in the whole world. And I'm privileged, and we all are privileged to live here in Nova Scotia. But we've got to set a structure in place that the people that want to stay here, or the people that want to move here from away, and I have a lot of neighbors that move from away that are here to retire with a lot of expertise that isn't being used. It would be nice if they would come at a lot younger age and start businesses here and develop businesses and make the economy grow. But that's not going to happen under the present government from what I can see. You know, it's so important to keep our young people here and make sure that they are generating the businesses that have to be generated in the province to make our economy grow. I'll give you an example. When I was first elected in 1993, and I'll probably get some laughter out of this from the opposition or the government over here, but it wasn't a funny matter because the tourism on the Eastern Shore at that time was less than 1% of the total tourism in the province. So from 1993 to 1999, we had double-digit growth in tourism. I'm looking at the most recent stats, and we got double-digit decline in tourism in that same area. That's disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful. A place that has unemployment rates probably in some of the areas approaching 60%, and a population very elderly. But despite the efforts of the Seaside Tourism Committee that has been absolutely instrumental in doing a tremendous amount of work, but at the same time, you see the numbers decline. That's real jobs. That's jobs in the local communities. That's jobs in the summertime in particular for young people that want to go to university and be able to stay at home, enjoy at least a short while at home before they have to move out of the province or move out of the area. So these things have to be addressed. It's so important that they are addressed and addressed immediately. Now I would ask the government to consider these things and also move towards getting a situation in this province set up that our young people can stay here and work here and live here. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Sorry, time for debate has expired.
I'll now recognize the Government House Leader for tomorrow's hours.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, before requesting adjournment, I was wondering if I could have the consent of the House to return to presenting reports of committees, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the chairman, thank you. On behalf of the chairman of the Committee on Law Amendments, I'm directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bill, Bill number 57, an act to amend Chapter 62 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Cemetery and Funeral Services Act. The committee recommends this bill to the favorable consideration of the House with certain amendments.
Committee has referred to the whole House on bills. I'll now recognize the Government House Leader. Agreed?
Agreed.
Recognize the Government House Leader for tomorrow's hours.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the House will sit tomorrow from 2 till 8. The House will convene at 2 for the presentation of the budget, and following that, we will then go into the leader of the official opposition will commence his remarks in reply to the budget speech, then adjourn that and go into the daily routine. And following question period, Mr. Speaker, we will go into public bills for second reading, and we will do, starting with the adjourned debate on Bill 48, we'll move forward. And I would imagine, Mr. Speaker, that in all probability, we will adjourn sometime before 8 o'clock tomorrow evening.